Andrea was on top of the world, CEO of a billion-dollar company, living in a mansion, wearing designer suits. She had it all. She had power. She had control. And, most importantly, she had no patience for weakness. When her assistant, Emily, made a mistake with the company's financial reports, Andrea didn't hesitate. "You're fired." When her driver didn't get her coffee exactly the way she liked, Andrea scolded him in front of everyone. "Do better next time or you'll be gone." For Andrea, it was simple. You either perform or you're nothing. But when a new business partner named Daniel entered her life, he seemed different. Quiet, kind, eager to please. Andrea never took him seriously. She saw him as another minor cog in her well-oiled machine. Until one day, she walked into her office to find everything she had worked for gone. The financial statements she had been relying on were all forged. Her empire, built on years of ruthless ambition, was now crumbling at her feet. And the person who had set it all in motion? Daniel. But this time, the hunter became the hunted. What would you do if the person you once underestimated was now the one holding all the power? Like and subscribe if you believe karma always catches up. Andrea Worthington lived her life by one rule: control everything or be controlled. At 38, she was already the CEO of Caldwell Industries, one of the most powerful tech firms in the country. A mansion on the edge of the city, a personal driver, designer clothes that cost more than most people's annual salary. Her office, on the top floor of a gleaming skyscraper, had a view that stretched for miles. Her world was perfect, or so she thought. Every day followed the same routine. She woke up at 5 a.m. sharp. A quick workout, followed by a healthy breakfast, fruit, black coffee, and a protein shake. Then, at 8 a.m., she was in the office, her heels clicking sharply across the polished floors, her assistants scrambling to meet her demands before she even finished her first sip of coffee. Emails, reports, and phone calls, get it all done. Andrea barked, already typing out her own notes on the tablet. Her assistant, Emily, a young woman in her 20s, shuffled behind her with a stack of files. Andrea barely looked at her, speaking without pause. "Get the financial projections ready. I want to know exactly where we stand before the board meeting tomorrow. And if anyone messes this up again, they'll be out. Understand?" Emily nodded, but Andrea barely caught the glance of hesitation in her eyes. The girl was timid, the perfect assistant for someone like Andrea. She didn't need to think. She just needed to execute. Andrea's life was built on efficiency, on being better than everyone else. Her company was thriving thanks to her ability to make ruthless decisions and manage people as assets, not people. She knew how to manipulate the market. She knew how to control the narrative. And when someone messed up, they were out, no exceptions. "Your job is to do as I say," she would tell employees during meetings. "I don't have time for excuses. I don't have time for failure. Get it done." And they did. Her high-rise office was filled with awards, certifications, and praise. Her network was unrivaled. Every big name in tech, finance, and politics wanted her on their side. She was untouchable. She made sure of it. One afternoon, she walked into a meeting with Daniel Harris, a potential business partner. He was quiet, reserved, a far cry from the usual forceful characters she was used to dealing with. He didn't speak much during the meeting. Instead, he listened, his hands folded neatly in front of him. His eyes, calculating, sharp, never wavered. Andrea felt something stir. Annoyance. Why wasn't he pushing? Why wasn't he offering something to impress her? Why wasn't he trying to manipulate her the way everyone else did? She leaned back in her chair and sized him up. He was different, and that intrigued her for a moment. She decided to give him a chance. After all, every deal is about power, and she never turned down an opportunity to expand hers. "We can partner on the new tech project," she said, voice smooth, calculated. "But I'm in charge. You follow my lead, and you better not mess this up." Daniel nodded. "Of course. I'm just here to help." Help? She didn't need help. She needed control. But something about his quiet confidence struck her as unsettling. "Fine," she said. I'll get the contract prepared. Let's discuss details next week. Over the next month, Daniel kept his distance, staying in the background while Andrea made all the major decisions. He had his own ideas, of course, but he was careful, biding his time. He worked in the shadows, offering subtle suggestions but never pushing too hard. Andrea didn't notice the subtle shift. She was too focused on her empire. The truth was, Andrea didn't trust people who didn't need her. She couldn't fathom someone who wouldn't worship her ambition. She didn't realize that Daniel wasn't impressed by her at all. And he wasn't there for power. He was there for something else. Days turned into weeks, and Andrea's life remained perfect on the surface. The board meetings went as planned. Her company's profits soared. She had everything. But in the back of her mind, something was starting to itch. Then came the first sign that everything might not be as secure as it seemed. One late evening, Andrea walked into her office to check on the financial reports for the upcoming board meeting. She noticed something strange, discrepancies, small ones at first, but enough to make her pause. She pulled up the data. More numbers, more red flags. And the more she dug, the more she realized her trusted CFO had been stealing. And worse, the fraudulent transactions seemed to point back to Daniel. Andrea felt a cold chill run down her spine. She stared at the screen, the weight of the realization hitting her like a freight train. Daniel had been playing her the whole time. She immediately called her CFO. He was fired that night. She wasn't going to let anyone destroy her empire. But as she began looking deeper into the financial reports, she found something even more terrifying. The entire system had been compromised. Her wealth, her status, her business, everything she built was based on fraudulent transactions, and the money was gone. Andrea's mind raced as she picked up the phone to call her legal team. But it was too late. Before she could even make the first call, the police were knocking at her door. Daniel had pulled the strings perfectly. The evidence was airtight. He had used her ambition against her, manipulated the system from the inside out, and now it was all crashing down. The fall was quick. The media blitzed her, her face plastered on every news outlet, not as the CEO who built an empire, but as the fraud behind it. Her name, once synonymous with success, became a symbol of greed, arrogance, and hubris. As the days passed, Andrea realized that everything she thought she knew about power, control, and success was irrelevant now. Her company was gone. Her wealth was gone. Her reputation was in tatters. And Daniel? He was the one who came to collect. He stood in front of her apartment, a figure she had once dismissed as inconsequential, now untouchable. He handed her a folded piece of paper. It was the contract they had signed months ago. "I could have let you keep your position," Daniel said quietly. "I could have let you keep the house. I could have let you keep everything. But you didn't learn your lesson." Andrea looked up at him. No anger in his eyes, just quiet resolution. "You thought your money made you untouchable. But in the end, everyone is touched by the consequences of their actions." With that, Daniel turned and walked away. Andrea sat in the office of her penthouse. The skyline of the city stretched out before her, a city she had conquered. But now, looking out over the sprawling view, it all felt like a distant memory, a mirage that had once felt solid. Her company, her name, everything she had built was gone. The news reports were everywhere. Andrea Worthington, the CEO who built an empire on lies. Wealthy businesswoman accused of massive fraud. Caldwell Industries CEO now facing charges of financial malfeasance. Her lawyer, Alan Foster, sat across from her, his suit rumpled, a grim look in his eyes. She couldn't read him anymore. The man who had once been a trusted confidant now seemed like a stranger. "They're coming after everything," Alan said, his voice flat. "They've seized all your assets. Bank accounts are frozen. Caldwell Industries is under investigation. And we've had multiple offers from buyers looking to liquidate what's left." Andrea clenched her fists. "What about Daniel?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Where is he now?" "Don't waste your time," Alan said, his voice hard. "He's already disappeared. There are rumors he's started a new company in Silicon Valley. No one can find him." Andrea leaned back, staring at the wall. For a long time, there had been nothing but power in her life. The feeling that she was invincible. No one had dared to challenge her. And now she was left with nothing. Her empire was slipping away, and the worst part? She had no control over any of it. The weeks that followed were a blur of press conferences, legal meetings, and public scrutiny. Every time she walked out of her apartment, there were reporters shouting questions at her. Every time she opened the door, there were whispers behind her back. Her house, once the symbol of her wealth, felt like a prison now. She had no comfort, no safety. Even worse, Daniel was everywhere. The news was filled with stories of his meteoric rise, the companies he'd invested in, the way he was positioning himself as a leading figure in the tech world, the whispers about how he'd taken everything Andrea had worked for and turned it into something bigger and better. The worst part? He was silent. No statements, no interviews, nothing. He was a ghost, but his absence was deafening. It made every headline, every report feel like a punch in the gut. One day, after Andrea's phone buzzed with yet another press notification, she finally snapped. "I need to meet him. I need to know what he wants," she told Alan, standing up from her chair. Alan hesitated, looking at her with concern. "Andrea, I don't think this is a good idea. You've already tried reaching out to him. What more do you think you'll get from meeting him face to face?" "He ruined me," Andrea said, her voice shaking with anger. "I need to see his face. I need to understand how it happened." She left the office determined. She needed answers. She needed to take back control. She knew she couldn't undo what had been done, but she couldn't let it end like this. The next morning, Andrea tracked Daniel down. He was at a small office in the heart of Silicon Valley. The building was modest compared to the skyscrapers she had become accustomed to, but there was something about it, something about Daniel, that felt different. She stood outside the door, her hand shaking as she knocked. She had no idea what she would say, but she knew she had to say something. The door opened slowly, and there he was, Daniel, calm, collected, unchanged. "Ms. Worthington," Daniel said, his voice smooth, almost cordial. "I didn't expect to see you." Andrea tried to keep her composure, but the anger was seeping through. "You took everything from me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And now you just walk away and scathe. I want to know why. I want to know why you did this." Daniel didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just looked at her with that same calculated calmness that had unsettled her months ago. "You don't understand," Daniel said slowly, leaning against the doorframe. "You never did. I didn't take anything from you. You handed it to me on a silver platter. You handed me everything by being too arrogant, too controlling, too blind to see that there are consequences to the way you treat people." Andrea took a step forward. "What do you want from me? You've ruined my life, Daniel. Why? Why all this?" He looked at her for a long time, and then his lips curled into a faint smile. "You think I ruined your life, Andrea? No, I didn't. You did it to yourself. I just helped you see it." Andrea froze. "I don't need anything from you, Andrea," Daniel continued. "I've already built something better. I've won. But if you want some advice, stop fighting it. You're already losing. The only thing left for you to do is figure out who you are now that you don't have all that power. Who you are when you have to face yourself, not the empire you've built." Andrea stood there in silence. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she couldn't say anything. She didn't have the words. Daniel's smile didn't falter. He turned and walked away, leaving Andrea standing in the doorway, staring at the ground. The next few days felt like an eternity. Andrea couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. She couldn't escape the feeling that everything was slipping through her fingers. Her legal team continued to scramble, trying to find some loophole to save her reputation, but everything was getting tighter. Every move they made only seemed to make it worse. The more they fought, the deeper her fall seemed to become. And through it all, Daniel remained silent. Andrea's reality had changed completely. She no longer had the luxury of control. The ruthless CEO, the woman who had destroyed careers with a snap of her fingers, was now a broken shell of her former self. The people she once had no time for, the assistants, the underlings, the people who never mattered, were now the ones whose faces she could no longer ignore. They were the ones who were watching her fall. But in the silence of her new life, one thing was clear. She wasn't untouchable. And for the first time, she had to face the consequences of everything she had done. Andrea couldn't escape the gnawing feeling of emptiness. The first few days after the meeting with Daniel were the hardest. She couldn't shake the weight of his words. He was right. She had been blind to her own arrogance, to the way she had treated everyone like a pawn in her game of power. But now that game had ended. Her calls were going unanswered. Her emails were ignored. Her once trusted colleagues avoided eye contact. And worst of all, her company was being torn apart from the inside out. The next blow came when the board of Caldwell Industries voted to remove Andrea from her position as CEO. It was the final step in her downward spiral. The company she had worked so hard to build, the empire she thought was indestructible, was now slipping from her grasp. The media played their part too, running stories about her downfall, interviewing former employees, and posting old clips of her ruthless decisions that made her seem even colder, more manipulative than she had been. She wasn't a CEO anymore. She was public enemy number one. On top of all that, her assets were frozen, leaving her with barely enough money to pay her rent. Her luxurious apartment was suddenly an empty shell, a reminder of everything she had lost. One morning, she sat in the living room of her apartment, staring at the eviction notice in her hands. The walls seemed to close in on her, the reality of her situation sinking deeper with every second. The woman who had once been unstoppable was now vulnerable, a pawn in someone else's game. Andrea stood up and walked to the window. She watched the world go by, people going to work, smiling, chatting, living their lives. She had been that person once. She had been part of that world. But now, she was on the outside looking in. She had nothing left to her name. It was then that she realized something. She was not going to let this be the end. Not yet. Andrea called her lawyer, Alan. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steady now. "Find out where Daniel is. I need to meet with him again." Alan hesitated. "Andrea, I think it's too late for that. You've been outplayed. He's already 2 steps ahead. You're not going to—" "I don't care. I'm not done," Andrea interrupted. "If I'm going down fighting. Find him." Alan was silent for a moment before replying, "I'll do what I can, but you need to know he's not just playing the game. He's already won." Later that evening, Andrea sat at her desk in her now sparse office, the files of Caldwell Industries in front of her. She stared at them, the cold, hard truth dawning on her. She had to act fast. She had to get back to the top. There was still a way, if she could just find it. 2 days later, she found Daniel. It wasn't hard. The man had become a minor celebrity since his takeover of Caldwell Industries. He had done interviews, posed for magazine covers, and started his own company, a rising star in Silicon Valley. Andrea found him at a tech conference in a plush, high-rise building downtown. He was standing near the stage, speaking to a group of investors and tech gurus. He looked just as calm as he had that day, when he stood in front of her and made her feel like nothing. "Daniel," Andrea called out, pushing through the crowd. His eyes met hers with a quiet amusement, but his smile was cold. "Well, well, if it isn't the former queen," he said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "I didn't expect you to show up here. It seems like you've been busy falling apart." "Cut the crap," Andrea snapped, stepping forward. "You think you've won? You think you're going to walk away with everything? I'll fight you for it. I'll take back what's mine. You won't even know what hit you." Daniel chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "You've always been about power, haven't you, Andrea? That's the problem. You never cared about people. You only cared about control. And now look at you." He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're not just fighting me, Andrea," he said, his tone turning serious. "You're fighting the very thing you've built. You've alienated everyone who mattered to you. I didn't ruin your life. You did that all on your own. I just opened your eyes to it." Andrea felt her chest tighten. The words hit harder than she expected. For a moment she hesitated. Had he really won? No, she said quietly, her voice low. You're wrong. I still have something. I still have my will. Daniel shook his head. Not anymore. You don't have the power you used to. Your reputation's gone. Your company's gone. Your control is gone. You'll never get it back. Andrea took a deep breath, pushing the doubt away. She had to fight. She had to prove that she wasn't going to be a victim. Not now. Not after everything she had built. She looked at Daniel one last time. You think this is over? It's just beginning. You haven't seen the last of me. Daniel didn't say anything. He just walked away, leaving her standing there, feeling the weight of her words. As the days passed, Andrea's anger grew. She wasn't going to let this man destroy her. She wasn't going to let anyone do that. She began reaching out to old connections, calling in favors, digging into her past dealings. She wasn't going to give up. Not yet. She'd rebuild, even if it meant starting from the bottom. But she knew something. Her fight had only just begun. Andrea hadn't slept in 2 days. The weight of her situation was crushing her. The endless meetings with lawyers, the press conferences where she was forced to defend her actions. Every time she opened her mouth, it felt like the world was looking at her, waiting for her to fail. The more she tried to fight back, the more she realized just how deep the hole was. Her accounts were frozen, her business was under investigation, and worst of all, Daniel seemed untouchable. He was out there, thriving in his new empire, while she was being buried under the rubble of hers. The eviction notice came as a shock, even though deep down she had known it was coming. It was one more thing to remind her that her wealth, her power, her control, all the things she had clung to, were now out of reach. Sitting in her empty apartment, Andrea stared at the walls that used to hold pictures of her success, of her power. Now everything seemed so empty. What had it all been for? Her phone buzzed again. Another call from her lawyer, Alan. She almost didn't pick up. Andrea, we need to talk. Alan's voice crackled through the phone. What is it now, Alan? She snapped, her patience wearing thin. I don't have time for more bad news. It's not bad news. I found something that might help us turn this around. Andrea's pulse quickened. What? What are you talking about? Daniel, we might be able to tie him to the financial fraud, at least enough to get him on the hook. I know this sounds crazy, but I have a lead. He's not as clean as he seems. Andrea sat up straight. What do I need to do? Meet me tomorrow. I'll explain everything. Andrea had heard the rumors, the whispers that Daniel had some skeletons in his closet, but she never paid attention. Now, for the first time, it felt like her chance. This was her way out. She couldn't lose again. The next morning, she dressed in her best suit, despite the fact that it barely fit anymore. Her heels clicked across the floor as she walked into the dingy office where Alan was waiting. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paperwork. It was far from the polished luxury she was used to, but it didn't matter now. All right, she said, sitting down. What do you have on him? Alan pushed a stack of papers across the table. Here's the thing. Daniel wasn't just involved in the company's finances. He manipulated a number of contracts, forged signatures, and if we can prove it, we could bring him down. Andrea's fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. She read names. She saw the connections. It was all there. But this isn't enough, Alan added. We need more. Something to tie him directly to the fraud. Andrea's eyes lit up. I'll get it. I'll find it. The next few days were a whirlwind. Andrea dove into the paperwork, poring over every document, meeting with former employees, and tracing the transactions that had been covered up. She was determined. She was fighting for her life. But as she dug deeper, the truth became clearer. Daniel wasn't just a business partner who had outsmarted her. He had set her up. Every move she made, every step she took, had been carefully calculated. She realized he had known her weaknesses. He had watched her for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. He wasn't just taking her down as a competitor. He was taking her down personally. And worst of all, he had no intention of giving her a way out. One night, as Andrea sat at her desk with the evidence she had gathered, there was a knock at her door. She didn't expect anyone, and she certainly didn't want company. She opened the door to find Emily, her former assistant. "What do you want?" Andrea snapped, though a small part of her felt surprised to see her old employee standing there with her head bowed. "I need to talk to you," Emily said quietly, her voice trembling. Andrea sighed, stepping aside to let her in. "What is it, Emily? What could you possibly want from me now?" Emily hesitated. "I'm sorry about how I left things. I know I wasn't the best employee, and I didn't stand up for myself, but I need to tell you something. About Daniel." Andrea's heart skipped a beat. What did Emily know? "Go on," she said, trying to hide her growing panic. Emily took a deep breath and looked Andrea in the eye. "He's been planning this for months, maybe even longer. He played you, Andrea. He knew you would trust him. He knew your ego would make you blind. And when the time came, he took it all." Andrea stood still, her chest tightening. "I know that, Emily, but you didn't tell me anything I didn't already figure out." "Maybe," Emily said, voice softening, "but I also know something you don't. I know how to expose him." Andrea stared at Emily. The silence stretched between them. Could she trust her former assistant? Was this the chance she had been waiting for? Could she trust anyone? Emily handed Andrea a flash drive. "I've been working on this for a while," she said. "Daniel has kept a backup of everything, all his communications, his fake identities, and the hidden accounts he set up to siphon off your money." Andrea froze. The evidence she needed was here. "Why are you doing this?" Andrea asked, her voice shaking. Emily swallowed. "Because I've been watching you. I've seen how hard you've worked, and I know you're not a monster. I can't stand by and watch him destroy you." As Andrea took the flash drive, something inside her shifted. She felt a spark of hope, something she hadn't felt in weeks. She looked at Emily. "I'll make sure you're protected. But if this works..." Emily nodded. "I know. I just want to see justice done." The next day, Andrea went straight to Alan, showing him the drive. The truth was in her hands. This was her chance to take down Daniel and prove to the world that she wasn't the woman they thought she was, but it wouldn't be easy. The fight had only just begun. Andrea sat in her car, staring at the front of the building where Daniel's new company had its headquarters. The glass facade gleamed under the afternoon sun, an arrogant symbol of success built on the back of her empire. She felt the weight of the flash drive in her pocket, its contents ready to bring everything crashing down. Her plan was simple: confront Daniel, present the evidence, and force him to face the consequences of his actions. This was her moment to reclaim her life, her dignity, her reputation. She had to believe this was the right thing to do, the only thing left to do. As she entered the lobby, she was greeted by a receptionist who barely looked up from her phone. "How can I help you?" "I need to speak with Daniel Harris." Immediately. The receptionist raised an eyebrow, glancing at Andrea with obvious judgment. "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't need an appointment," Andrea replied, her voice steady despite the racing thoughts in her mind. "Tell him it's urgent." The receptionist hesitated, but then picked up the phone. After a brief conversation, she nodded and waved Andrea over. "Mr. Harris will see you now. You're lucky." Andrea walked into Daniel's office with a steady stride, though her heart was pounding in her chest. The man sitting behind the desk looked almost identical to the person she remembered, confident, calm, but with a hint of smugness. But something was different. Daniel was no longer the man she had underestimated. He had transformed, not just in wealth, but in power, influence, and the control he held over everything she once owned. "Ms. Worthington," he said, standing as she entered, his voice almost casual. "I didn't expect this visit. I thought you'd be too busy dealing with your situation." Andrea didn't sit. Instead, she placed the flash drive on his desk, sliding it toward him. "I know everything, Daniel." Daniel raised an eyebrow, but didn't flinch. "Do you?" "I have evidence. Evidence of your fraud, the transactions you made to siphon my company's funds. I'm taking you down." "This is over," Andrea said, her voice firm, but her insides were shaking. Daniel glanced down at the flash drive, then back up at her. There was no fear in his eyes, just cold amusement. You think this will change anything? Andrea's anger flared. I made you. You would have nothing without me. You're a liar, a fraud. I never needed you, Andrea, Daniel replied quietly, leaning back in his chair. You were never part of my plan. You were just a stepping stone. I didn't make you, you made yourself. You made all the choices, and now you're here, thinking you can stop me. But you're too late. Andrea's mind raced as she tried to process his words. What do you mean? What are you talking about? Daniel's lips curled into a smile. I've been planning this from the start. From the moment I walked into Caldwell Industries, I knew what I had to do. You were blind to it. You thought I was just another cog in your machine. But I was never here to serve you. I was here to take it all. Andrea stepped back, her breath catching. For a moment, she felt like the ground beneath her was falling away. You planned all of this, she whispered, incredulous. You lied to me. You used me. No, Daniel said, his voice calm but sharp. I didn't use you. You used yourself. You built your empire on lies, on crushing people beneath you. You never once thought about anyone other than yourself. I was just the one who exposed it. Andrea's legs felt weak as she tried to comprehend his words. Her world had been shattered. But now it felt like Daniel was rubbing salt into the wound. Daniel leaned forward, his gaze intense. You had a choice every step of the way, and you made the wrong one. Every single time. Andrea's heart clenched. She could feel it. She could feel the guilt bubbling up, the realization that he was right. She had used people, manipulated them, crushed them to get ahead. And now, when the tables had turned, she was the one left in the ruins of her own ambition. It's not too late, Andrea said, her voice low. I can still bring you down. You're not invincible. Daniel's expression softened slightly, but his voice was firm. It's too late for you, Andrea. Your empire is gone, and there's nothing you can do to bring it back. I'm not some villain you can defeat with evidence and threats. I've already won. The game is over. Andrea felt the weight of his words like a heavy hand pressing down on her chest. The evidence she had, the one thing she had clung to, seemed so insignificant now. The system was already rigged. Her fight, her anger, her desperation, none of it mattered. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave. She had spent her entire life fighting the wrong battles. In her thirst for control, for power, she had lost sight of what truly mattered. She had destroyed herself. I want my life back. Daniel, she whispered, her voice breaking. I want to fix this. Daniel stood and walked around the desk, stopping in front of her. He didn't mock her. He didn't gloat. He simply looked at her with pity. You can't fix what you've already broken, Andrea. Not everything is fixable. Andrea stood there for a long time, the weight of his words crushing her. She had tried to control everything, to manipulate the world around her, and now everything was slipping through her fingers. She was powerless. But just as she turned to leave, Daniel spoke again, his voice quieter this time. You know, it doesn't have to end like this. Andrea stopped and turned toward him, her heart pounding. You're right about one thing, Daniel said. You can fight, but it's not about what you can win back. It's about what you choose to become after losing everything. He paused, watching her carefully. You've already lost the empire, but you still have your future. Andrea stood there, staring at him, the reality sinking in. This was her choice now. Andrea stared at the glass doors of the high-rise building, once her fortress, now just a distant memory. The city below her felt like a different world, a world where she no longer belonged. The weight of Daniel's words still lingered in her mind. It's too late for you, Andrea. The game is over. She had been a titan once, the woman who walked into rooms and made people tremble, the woman whose smile could either build or destroy careers, the woman who controlled the world by controlling the people in it. And now she had nothing. 2 weeks later, Andrea found herself sitting across from Alan in a small, grimy cafe. She had already lost everything. The company, the mansion, her name, her reputation, all reduced to ashes. Even the small amount of money she had left was rapidly depleting, and soon enough, she would be forced to sell off the few things that still gave her any sense of self. Her phone buzzed on the table. Another notification from the press. Andrea Worthington, ex-CEO, under investigation for fraud. Her stomach churned. She didn't need to read the article. She knew what it said. Alan looked at her with concern, his eyes studying her more closely than he ever had before. "I've looked into it," Alan said softly. "There's still some hope. We can fight back. If we appeal the case against you, there's a chance to get the charges reduced." Andrea didn't respond right away. The silence between them stretched on. "Do you think that's going to make a difference, Alan?" she asked bitterly. "Do you really think I can fix this? I've lost everything. Daniel played me from the start, and now the whole world is watching me fall apart. What do I even have left?" Alan hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've still got your future. That's what matters now. I know it's hard to see past the damage right now, but you don't need to rebuild everything at once. Start small." Andrea laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "Start small? I went from running a multi-million-dollar company to nothing. Start small? What does that even mean?" "You start with you," Alan replied, his voice firm now. "You've spent your entire life trying to control the world around you. Maybe it's time to stop and look at who you are without that control. It's not about winning back everything you lost. It's about finding peace with what you have left." Andrea's heart ached as she looked out the window, watching the city below. People walked by, oblivious to her world shattering. She had tried to control everything, and now she was left with nothing to hold onto but the wreckage of her own choices. But as Alan's words lingered in her mind, something shifted within her. Maybe she couldn't go back. Maybe everything she had built was gone. But she still had a choice. She could wallow in her failure, or she could start over. The next morning, Andrea made a decision. She walked into a small, humble office building on the outskirts of the city. The smell of coffee and the hum of quiet conversations filled the air. She stepped up to the receptionist. "I need a job," she said, her voice steady, but with a newfound humility. "I'm ready to start over." The receptionist raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the woman standing before her. But Andrea didn't care about the look. She just needed a place to start, anywhere. Days passed, and Andrea took a job as a low-level consultant in a small tech company. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't powerful. But it was a start. She spent her days in the back office, reviewing contracts and offering suggestions, staying out of the limelight. No one knew who she was, and no one cared. And for the first time in a long while, Andrea felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. She didn't have to be in control of everything. She didn't need to be the CEO. She could just be. As the weeks went by, she started to make small connections with her new coworkers. She listened more than she spoke. She stopped focusing on power and status and started focusing on real, honest work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. One afternoon, while going over a financial report, Andrea was interrupted by a knock at her office door. She looked up to find Emily standing there, holding a small envelope. "I brought you something," Emily said with a shy smile. Andrea took the envelope, surprised. She hadn't expected to see Emily again after everything that had happened. Opening it, she found a letter from Daniel. It wasn't what she had expected. There were no threats, no condescension. The letter was simple, written in Daniel's usual calm, calculated style. "Andrea, I want to start by saying you were right. I didn't play fair. But I also didn't force you into anything. Everything that happened, every choice you made, was because of you. That's the difference between us. I played the game, but you let the game play you. I've taken everything I wanted, and I don't regret that. But I think you'll find peace in something I can never have: contentment. Take care of yourself. Daniel." Andrea sat back in her chair, the letter in her hands. Contentment. The word echoed in her mind. What did Daniel know about contentment? About peace? The truth was he didn't have peace. He had what he wanted, but he would always be hungry for more. She had to let go of that hunger. Emily stepped closer, her voice gentle. "You okay?" Andrea nodded slowly, folding the letter back into the envelope. "I'm getting there," she said, her voice steady. She looked at the desk in front of her. The piles of paperwork. the low-level tasks she'd been assigned. It wasn't much, but it was something she could build from. Something that wasn't about ambition or power, but about making a real difference. For the first time, she felt a spark of hope. The days passed. Slowly, Andrea began to rebuild her life from the ground up. It wasn't easy. It wasn't glamorous. But she was no longer obsessed with getting back to the top. Now, she focused on the small moments, the quiet satisfaction of doing good work, of not being above it all. And one day, as she was walking out of her new office, her phone buzzed. Another notification. She almost didn't look, but then she did. It was a news article, a headline that read, "Andrea Worthington, from CEO to resetting her life." The article wasn't about her failure. It was about her resilience, about how she had gone from the heights of corporate power to starting again, humbly and without shame. She smiled to herself. For the first time in a long time, Andrea realized that she wasn't done yet. She had another chance, and this time she was going to take it on her own terms. Andrea sat at a small table in the local cafe, sipping her coffee slowly. The shop was modest, nestled between two large office buildings, the kind of place she had once passed by without a second thought. But now it felt like the perfect place to be, far from the world of corporate skyscrapers and boardrooms. Here, people spoke in soft tones, the barista knew her name, and no one expected anything from her. It had been 6 months since she'd left the high-rise offices behind. 6 months of working at a small tech firm, taking on tasks that were simple, menial even, but essential. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't mind. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her thoughts. She picked it up and saw an email from Alan, her former lawyer. Subject: an invitation. Curious, she opened it. It was an invitation to a local tech conference. At the bottom of the message, there was a line that made her pause. "I've nominated you for the Community Impact Award. You're being recognized for your resilience and how you've turned things around, not just for yourself, but for others." Andrea read the words again. Community Impact Award. She couldn't help but smile, though she didn't understand it at first. Why would anyone want to recognize her? She had been the very picture of corporate greed, a woman who used people, manipulated them, and climbed her way to the top with no regard for the damage left behind. But now, things were different. She was different. She had found something she never thought she'd have: peace. The award ceremony took place in a modest conference hall on the edge of town. The atmosphere was casual, far removed from the polished corporate galas Andrea was used to. No red carpets, no fancy suits. Just people talking about real work, real contributions to the community. Andrea had debated whether to attend at all. She didn't feel worthy, but Alan had convinced her, saying, "You've earned this. You're not the same person you were, Andrea, and neither is the world." When her name was called, she stood up slowly, her legs feeling heavy. The room went quiet and all eyes were on her. She felt the weight of their gazes, not judging, but waiting, curious. As Andrea walked to the front of the room, a small plaque was handed to her, inscribed with her name and the words "for outstanding resilience in the face of adversity." She looked out at the crowd, many of whom were strangers, and yet something about the moment felt real, genuine. She took a deep breath. "I don't deserve this," Andrea began, her voice unsteady at first. "Not yet, anyway. I've spent most of my life trying to build something that wasn't real. And I hurt people along the way, a lot of people." She paused, her gaze drifting to the plaque in her hands. "But somewhere along the way, I started realizing something. Success isn't about money. It's not about power. It's about people. And I spent too long ignoring that." Her voice wavered, but she steadied herself. "I've lost a lot. I've lost my reputation, my company, my wealth. But what I've gained, what I'm starting to build, is far more important. I'm learning that it's never too late to change. And that redemption, even when it seems impossible, is worth the fight." The room was silent for a moment. Then, someone started clapping, slowly at first, but soon the applause grew louder, echoing through the hall. Andrea stood still for a moment, stunned. She hadn't expected this. Not from these people. But it didn't matter. They saw her. For the first time, She felt like she wasn't just a CEO or a failure. She was just Andrea, a person trying to rebuild her life, piece by piece. After the ceremony, people came up to her to offer congratulations. They weren't interested in her past. They didn't care about her mistakes. They only saw the woman who was trying and failing, but also learning. A few people even shared their own stories of losses, of mistakes, of starting over. It felt good. It felt human. One of them was a young woman named Sarah, a former employee of Andrea's who had been laid off during a major restructuring. She had tears in her eyes as she approached Andrea. "You don't remember me, do you?" Sarah said, her voice tentative. Andrea shook her head. "I'm sorry, I don't." "I worked in the finance department when you were CEO," Sarah said softly. "I never got a chance to speak up, but I watched how you treated people. It wasn't just about business for you. You treated people like things, and it hurt. But what I see now, what you're doing now, I just wanted to say that I'm proud of you." Andrea's chest tightened. She had no idea how to respond. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything." Sarah smiled gently. "No need to apologize. You've already done the hardest part. You're changing." As the night wore on, Andrea stayed at the conference, listening, learning, connecting. It wasn't the world-changing event she had once thought she needed to find. It wasn't some grand gesture that would make her powerful again. It was about simple moments, simple conversations. And for once, those things felt more important than any board meeting she'd ever sat in. When she left the conference, Andrea drove home quietly. The night was still, the city lights twinkling in the distance. She thought about what Sarah had said. "I'm proud of you." For the first time, she realized that the change she had made wasn't just for herself. It was for others, too. It was about learning how to be human, how to let go of pride, and how to embrace the small but powerful moments of redemption. As she pulled into the parking lot of her small apartment, Andrea realized something. This was her new beginning. The next few months passed in a blur of change for Andrea. She woke up each day in the small apartment she had rented after selling her mansion. The space was modest, but it felt like home. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and a couple of old furniture pieces from her previous life sat quietly in the corner. She didn't need luxury anymore, she needed peace. Every morning, she woke up early to go for a run in the park nearby. She had learned to find comfort in routine, a small joy in simple things. The life she had once lived, with all its flashing lights and delusions of control, seemed so far away now. One afternoon, Andrea was sitting in a local cafe when she noticed a young woman sitting at the table beside hers, typing frantically on her laptop. The girl looked exhausted, her eyes wide, her fingers moving fast as if she was trying to finish something before time ran out. Andrea watched her for a moment before deciding to speak up. "Hi," she said, her voice soft. The young woman looked up, startled. "Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to." "No, you're fine," Andrea said, offering a smile. "I couldn't help but notice that you seem like you're working pretty hard. Are you okay?" The young woman looked at her, unsure how to respond. "I'm just overwhelmed," she said. "I'm trying to get a business proposal done for a startup I'm working on, but everything feels like it's moving too fast." Andrea paused, then said, "You're not alone. I've been there. The pressure, the constant need to be perfect. But trust me when I say, perfection doesn't get you anywhere. Real progress does." The young woman blinked. "You know that?" Andrea laughed softly, shaking her head. "I used to think I knew everything. But I've learned the hard way that it's okay not to know. It's okay to fail as long as you get back up." For the next half hour, Andrea and the young woman, whose name was Lena, talked about business life and the pressures that came with wanting it all. Lena explained her dreams, her frustrations, and her doubts about whether she could make her startup work. Andrea listened carefully, offering her advice, but not the kind she had given in the past, where everything had to be about dominating the market. Instead, she spoke about the importance of connections, the value of being kind to people, and how sometimes it's not the big wins that matter, but the small, human moments that leave the longest-lasting impact. When they finished their conversation, Lena looked at Andrea with a mix of confusion and gratitude. I I don't know if you realize this, but you just gave me a whole new perspective. I was so focused on getting everything right that I almost forgot why I started this in the first place. Andrea smiled. You're welcome. Just remember, it's about the journey, not just the destination. Over the next few weeks, Andrea and Lena kept in touch. Andrea had become a quiet mentor to her, offering advice whenever Lena felt uncertain about her next move. One evening, Lena called Andrea. Hey, I just wanted to thank you, she said, her voice filled with emotion. I don't know what it is, but your words stuck with me. I realized that I've been so focused on getting the startup off the ground that I've neglected what really matters. Andrea chuckled softly. It's never too late to start over. Don't be afraid to change the way you're doing things. You're not just building a business, you're building a legacy. Lena paused, then added, I've decided I want to help others now. I think I'm going to start a program for young women who want to start their own businesses, but don't have the resources or support. Kind of like what you've done for me. Andrea's heart swelled with pride. She had helped someone see beyond just ambition and success, and Lena was now passing it forward. A few months later, Andrea stood in front of a small group of young entrepreneurs at a local community center. She had been invited to speak about her experiences, not as a former CEO, but as someone who had been humbled by her fall and rebuilt her life from the ground up. Hello, everyone, Andrea began, her voice calm but confident. I'm here today, not as someone who made billions or built an empire. I'm here as someone who has learned that true success isn't measured by what you have, but by what you give. She paused, looking around the room. I've made plenty of mistakes in my life. I've chased after things that didn't matter. I've hurt people and I've hurt myself. But what I've learned is that success isn't about the title you hold, the money you make, or how powerful you seem. It's about how you treat others and how you treat yourself along the way. The room was silent. I've spent most of my life thinking that power and wealth would give me everything I needed. But what I found instead was emptiness. It wasn't until I began focusing on real connections, on helping others, and on building relationships that I started finding peace. Andrea took a breath and smiled. If there's one thing I can leave you with today, it's this. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out. But you do need to have heart. And if you lead with that, everything else will follow. As Andrea left the community center, she felt something inside her shift again. She wasn't the same person who had once sat at the top of a corporate ladder. She wasn't the same woman who had once crushed people beneath her ambition. But now, she was building something different, something that mattered. Andrea stood in front of the community center's bulletin board, staring at the photos of all the young women she had mentored over the last few months. It was a simple board filled with pictures of smiling faces, handwritten notes, and gratitude for the workshops and training sessions she had held for aspiring entrepreneurs. Each photo was a reminder of the journey she had started, a journey that had led her to give back rather than take. The room was alive with energy, filled with people she had never met. They were all here because of the initiative she had helped Lena start, the one that aimed to support young women in their business endeavors. What started as a small idea had now become a growing movement, and for the first time in years, Andrea felt connected to something bigger than herself. The conference room door opened, and Lena walked in, holding a stack of papers and grinning. She said, I've been getting emails all week from people who want to partner with us, invest in the program. This is big. Andrea raised an eyebrow, amazed. Really? Lena nodded, excitement in her eyes. You have no idea. The program is getting recognized in places I never imagined. People are watching us. They're seeing the work we're doing and the impact we're having on these women's lives. Andrea smiled, her heart swelling. It was exactly what she had hoped for when she agreed to help. She wasn't just teaching business strategies. She was teaching them how to approach life with integrity, with compassion, and with a sense of community. As the months passed, Andrea's reputation started to shift. The stories in the news, once about her fall from grace, slowly began to morph into something else. Reporters started focusing not just on her mistakes, but on her journey of redemption. They began to highlight the people she had helped, the programs she had initiated, and the businesses she had mentored. Andrea had become a quiet force for good in her community. She wasn't the wealthy CEO anymore. She was Andrea, a woman who had faced the consequences of her actions and had used her experience to transform. One afternoon, Andrea received an unexpected call from a journalist. The tone of his voice was different from the usual snide remarks from the media. This was a man who wanted to hear her story. "Ms. Worthington," he said, "I've been following your journey for some time. I know your past, but I think people are interested in who you are now. Can I come interview you?" Andrea hesitated for a moment. She wasn't ready to relive her old life, but she knew that sharing her story was part of the healing process. It was time to be honest about everything, not just the bad parts, but the good that had come out of it. "Sure," she said. "Let's talk." The interview took place a few days later. Sitting across from the journalist, Andrea felt a strange sense of calm. She was no longer the woman who tried to control everything. She wasn't interested in controlling the narrative anymore. She was just herself. "So let's start with the basics," the journalist said, leaning forward. "Your name used to be synonymous with power, ambition, and success. But now it's associated with something completely different: humility, growth, and giving back. How did you make the switch?" Andrea took a deep breath, her mind racing through the years of mistakes, realizations, and transformations. "I think the real change came when I hit rock bottom. For so long I thought power, money, and control were the answers to everything. But what I realized after losing everything is that the real power lies in connection, in helping others, and in being present for people." She paused, looking at the journalist. "I was so caught up in my own success that I didn't realize I was losing sight of what mattered most. I had to learn how to rebuild myself from the inside out. I had to stop chasing things and start chasing meaning." The journalist nodded thoughtfully. "And it wasn't easy, I'm sure." "No," Andrea said with a small smile. "It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I may never get my old life back, but I've gained something that's far more valuable: a sense of purpose." When the interview was published a few days later, Andrea was surprised by the response. The article was respectful, not sensationalized. It focused on her journey of redemption, her work with the community, and her commitment to helping others rebuild their lives, not just her own. People appreciated her honesty. For the first time, the world was starting to see Andrea not as the ruthless businesswoman she once was, but as someone who had learned from her mistakes. As time passed, Andrea received more invitations to speak at conferences, at schools, and even in front of other businesses. Her story wasn't just about her fall, it was about rising again. She became an advocate for ethical leadership, teaching others that success is about how you uplift others, not tear them down. One afternoon, as Andrea walked through a local park with Lena, she saw a group of young women gathered in a circle, listening to someone speak. Andrea walked closer and realized the speaker was a woman who had been part of the program Lena and she had helped create. The woman noticed Andrea and smiled. "I remember when you spoke to us a few months ago. You said that we don't have to be perfect to make a difference. I still carry that with me. I think that's the reason we're doing so well." Andrea felt a warm flush of pride. This was it. This was the legacy she had worked so hard to build. Not the company she lost, not the wealth she had once taken for granted, but the people she had helped. That evening, Andrea sat in her small apartment, looking out the window at the city. It was quiet now. She wasn't in control of everything, and she didn't want to be. She had learned to let go, and as she thought about the future, she realized that what she had built was more lasting than anything she had ever achieved before. It was real, and it was all because she chose to give. Andrea sat alone on the balcony of her apartment. The evening sky stretched out before her. The city lights below twinkled softly, but they no longer felt like an impenetrable force. Now, they felt like a part of the world she could finally breathe in. The tension, the constant race to keep up with everything, had faded. She took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. This was enough. For the first time, she wasn't looking for more. She wasn't looking for validation, for recognition, or even for forgiveness. She had it all in a way she never expected. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Lena. Just wanted to say, thanks again. I wouldn't be where I am now without you. The program's doing better than we ever thought. You really changed everything for us. Andrea smiled and typed back. You did the work. I just showed you it was possible. As she hit send, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She stood up, walking inside to open it. Lena was standing there, smiling brightly. I thought I'd stop by, she said. Got a second? Always, Andrea replied, stepping aside to let her in. The two women sat down at the small kitchen table, sipping coffee. Andrea was no longer the sharp, calculated businesswoman she once was. She was just Andrea, the woman who had learned how to live without the constant pressure of control. How are things going with the program? Andrea asked, genuinely curious. Lena's eyes lit up. It's growing faster than we expected. We've already helped 5 more young women get their businesses off the ground, and we have 2 more workshops planned next month. People are really starting to take notice. Andrea felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had helped create something tangible, something that would continue to grow long after she was gone. This, more than anything, was her legacy. Lena paused, setting down her coffee cup. I also wanted to tell you something, she said, her voice soft. I've been thinking about what you said, about not being perfect and still making a difference. It really stuck with me. Andrea raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Lena smiled. Well, you've taught me a lot, but the biggest lesson was that it's not just about what you do, but how you do it. I used to think that if I made a mistake, it would be the end of everything. But now I know it's about getting up and continuing, even when things are tough. Andrea nodded, feeling a surge of pride. That's exactly it. We're all going to stumble. What matters is that we don't stay down. After a moment of silence, Lena added, I think the biggest change I've seen in myself is that I don't have to prove anything to anyone. I'm doing what I love. I'm creating something real. I'm content. The word hung in the air, and Andrea realized it was a word she hadn't allowed herself to think about for years. Content. She hadn't been content in so long, always chasing after more, always hungry for success. But now, sitting here with Lena, listening to the younger woman talk about her dreams, Andrea realized she was content. She had what she needed. She had her health. She had purpose. She had peace. Later that evening, Andrea went for a walk through the park. The night was calm, and she found herself in the same park where she had taken so many walks before, during the hardest times in her life, when everything seemed lost. As she walked along the winding path, she remembered the day she first arrived in this neighborhood, ready to start over. Her life felt so fragmented then, so uncertain. She was uncertain of who she was, of what she had left, but she had known she couldn't go back. She paused at the bench, looking out at the path that stretched before her. She had no idea what her future held, but that was okay. The uncertainty was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. She had chosen to live authentically, and for once, she wasn't chasing after something that didn't matter. She wasn't trying to build anything that wasn't rooted in what she truly cared about. Andrea pulled her phone out of her pocket and texted Alan. I've made peace with it all. I'm okay. The response was quick. I'm proud of you. You've come a long way. As Andrea stood up from the bench and continued walking, she noticed something small and beautiful, a child running through the park, laughing with her mother. The sound of their laughter reminded Andrea of something simple but powerful. Life is about the moments we share, the connections we make. It wasn't about winning or losing, it was about how we lived through it all. Andrea smiled to herself. This was her true legacy. She had changed, and in doing so, she had given others the chance to change too. As Andrea returned to her apartment, she felt an overwhelming sense of calm. She wasn't the woman who had once been driven by power, control, and the need for validation. She wasn't the woman who had destroyed herself chasing after things that didn't matter. Now, She was the woman who had found contentment in simply being herself, the woman who had helped others to do the same. The phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Lena. "Hey, Andrea." Lena's voice was warm. "I just wanted to tell you, thank you. You've taught me everything I need to know about living authentically." Andrea smiled, her heart full. "You don't need to thank me. You're doing it yourself. I'm just here to help guide the way." As she hung up the phone, Andrea looked out the window one last time. The city lights flickered in the distance, and she thought about everything she had been through. She thought about the woman she had been and the woman she had become. And for the first time in her life, Andrea felt complete. She was no longer striving for something that was out of reach. She had already arrived, not at the top of the ladder, but at the top of her own life.